Hello and welcome. Thank you for listening. Well, let's go straight in this week to verse 18 of Isaiah chapter 40. This is the question that follows on from Isaiah's mind-blowing description of God from last time in verses 12 to 17. With whom then will you compare God? Well, the answer is surely meant to be, well, no one at all, because he is incomparable. And yes, of course, we do compare him with things that we understand so that our finite and limited minds are able to grasp something of the greatness of God. But at the end of the day, he is incomparable, unlike anything or anyone else. Well, we're going to read verses 18 to 20 this time. With whom then will you compare God? To what image will you liken him? As for an idol, a metal worker casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and fashions silver chains for it. A person too poor to present such an offering selects wood that will not rot. They look for a skilled worker to set up an idol that will not topple. With whom will you compare him? Well, we've had some comparisons already in this chapter, haven't we? God's been compared to people. So we read that all flesh is like grass and their faithfulness like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall. He's been compared with the nations, the powerful nations around them. But they're just a drop in a bucket, dust on God's scales. And in these verses, the comparison is with other gods. Well, to what image will you liken him? And it goes on to say, as for an idol. Now, in a time and place of many gods where all the nations had their own gods, it must have been tempting to compare the Lord with these other gods of the nations around them, and especially the nations that were more powerful and more successful. Maybe that's because their gods are better than ours. Well, as these verses go on, it doesn't actually criticize the manufacture of idols, but just describes it for us. And that's enough. That's all Isaiah has to do. Because as we'll see, you cannot miss how ridiculous it is. So as for an idol, a metal worker casts it. Someone else is shaping and forming what your God is like. Another human, just a run-of-the-mill metal worker. A goldsmith overlays it with gold. It may look impressive and valuable in the end, but don't forget that's only because you've asked someone to paint it with gold for you. And he fashions silver chains for it. Well, it may be decked out to look shiny and sparkly. Or even perhaps you've had one made that's really, really big to tower over you in an awe-inspiring way. But you cannot escape the fact that idols are homemade and man-made. They are part of the creation rather than the creator. Well, then we're asked to imagine the situation where someone is too poor to create an expensive looking idol, or too poor for someone to create it for them. So what do? Well, just go outside their house and find a piece of wood and get someone to set it up so that it doesn't fall over. And I think there's two details here that just really highlight how ridiculous it is. Let me circle them for you. Firstly, it will not rot. This idol is made out of something, a material that rots. And even selecting wood that will not rot just merely draws attention to the vain attempts to create something that will last. And then it will not topple. And again, even though they're poor, it is worth splashing some cash here for a skilled craftsman to fashion the idol so that it won't keep falling over. Well, this is just really awkward, isn't it? All this energy going into trying to stop your God from rotting, all this money going into trying to stop it from falling over. And yet Isaiah 40 gives us this picture of the eternal God, the creator of the ends of the earth, the one who holds all things in his hands. And it is him that they have forsaken. How can something made by people have the greatness of God? Just keeps toppling over. Well, I'd like to just point you back to chapter 36. The king of Assyria has attacked Judah and the city of Jerusalem is under threat. Let me put a few verses from that chapter up on the screen. As King Hezekiah refuses to surrender, the king of Assyria says, verse 4, "On what are you basing this trust of yours?" And in verse 5, "On whom are you depending?" Well, it's a great chapter to read as the king of Assyria comes against Judah and basically says, don't let King Hezekiah persuade you to trust in the Lord. And so the big question for the people at that time is, who are they going to trust? But then we've seen, haven't we, in chapter 40, it gives us this vision of the return of the people from exile, their deliverance, and the vision of the incomparable God who will do this. And the question is, will the people, like Hezekiah did, will they trust the Lord? They're going through tough times, and the worst is yet to come. Who will they trust to get them through? Where will their loyalties lie? Well, not with themselves, not other people, not other nations, and certainly not other gods, but trust the eternal God, the creator of the ends of the earth, the one who holds all things in his hands. It's a no-brainer, and it's meant to be. Let me close with a quote from Tim Hughes, the Christian songwriter. He says, "When we encounter God, uncreated, all-powerful, self-existent, maker of all things, uncontained, unbreakable, unfathomable, and infinite, will we find perspective. We learn to embrace the smallness of who we are and marvel in the vastness of who he is. Earthly pleasures no longer take the place of knowing God and being known by him. We are left ruined, satisfied and dissatisfied at the same time. And we begin a journey, thirsting for more of God, desperate to understand more clearly the character and nature of God. When we encounter the reality of God, true worship is the outcome."